You know, I feel like the double knit button band really needs to do a lot of work to polish this up because it's currently kind of looking like something out of Shrek's swamp. Hi, hello, my name is Allie. I'm an independent graphic designer coming to you from just outside Toronto, and this is my channel where I talk about what I'm knitting, how it's going, and what it's costing me. And today we have a good old-fashioned podcast update episode, which I'm excited about because I feel like there have been enough kind of special format episodes going on lately between like seasonal knitting plans and podcast roundups that it's been a while since I've had this space of an entire video to just sit down and just ramble about the things that I'm working on. So today I have a whip update for you as well as a couple of acquisitions. As for my tea of the day, I'm drinking it out of my chip mug, which I think he just deserves a moment. And today I'm drinking the T Squared blackcurrant tea, which this is like a small business based out of Toronto, so we love that. Now as for what I'm wearing today, which you can barely see, maybe I need to get up for a second. Not that you can really see a whole lot more of it here, but this is my Fausta intended to be a bralette. I made it a full-length top by Low-Key Bull Knit, and looking at myself in this outfit, I'm currently feeling very Dr. Ellie Sattler, Laura Dern in Jurassic Park, feminist icon. I will say when I was putting it on before I tied it up, it was also really giving Chessie, is that her name, from The Parent Trap? All classics. So to check in on the cost per wear for this one, I finished this late last summer, so it hasn't really had a full summer's life yet. So currently I've only worn it 9 times and it cost me $75 to make it, which means that our current cost per wear is sitting at $8.33 Canadian. But I am curious to see where that's sitting by the end of the summer when it's had a little more time in its sort of natural habitat to be worn and to not always have to be layered in order to like justify its existence that day.
Hi, Editing Alley. So last time in my video all about my entire experience doing color work for the first time, I had like more than half of my contrast color left over, and it's an expensive, really nice Libana May yarn in the colorway Inco. So to use less than half of it and then for it to just be relegated to my stash pile seemed really silly. So I did a draw from the comments on my last video expressing interest in that giveaway, and the winner of that giveaway is Jody_May92. So if that's you, please send me an email at alliemakeseverything@gmail.com by 11:59 p.m. on Saturday, July 12th, and we'll arrange getting that out to you.
So for the real meat of this episode today, we need to dig into this whip. So this is one that I had just started in my summer knitting plans video, and this is the Lakes Cardigan by Ozetta. So let's run the project stats real quick. So the Lakes Cardigan is a saddle shoulder construction worsted weight pattern designed to be knit up on 5.5mm needles, which is actually the needles that I'm using for once, which never ever happens, which tells me maybe me and Ozetta are kind of kindred spirits. Maybe I should look into more Ozetta patterns. Maybe I would actually engage without having to upsize my needles all the time. Very interesting. Accommodates up to a 60-inch bust. I'm knitting the size small and the pattern costs $6.50 US. I'm knitting mine out of Noro Madara in the colorway Sake, which is actually the yarn that the sample is created out of in the pattern, but it is in that case paired with a mohair, which I'm not doing. I ordered mine from Scout and Skein, which is a small yarn shop in the US, and this was a very costly project that kind of became more costly in little increments. So let's break it down. The yarn itself cost me $293 Canadian for the 7 skeins that I purchased, which I thought would be erring definitely on the side of caution, but knowing that this yarn has been really hard for me to find. So when I found it somewhere, I was like, I am not running out of this. And if I end up with too much, I can probably like sell it off in a de-stash to someone who will be happy to have it, and I won't end up having to play yarn chicken. Now that was enough yarn for it to get free shipping, but within the US, which is not where I am. And I also could not get it to ship to Canada at all, which means that I had it shipped to a reshipper in the US, who then charged me $33 to ship it to me. Blech. And then, because of all of our super fun cross-border issues lately, I was also charged $48 in customs. Then if we add in the pattern cost I already mentioned, and the fact that I ordered some buttons this week, which we'll chat about in a minute, that added another $11, which means that our current project cost for this is sitting at $395 Canadian. Like just squeaking under $400, which makes me feel a little bit ill. I've also decided I think I'm going to experiment for a while with only saying out loud the numbers in one currency, and I will just use whichever one it makes most sense for based on the transaction and what currency it happened in, but I will be putting on screen conversions. Like if you're wondering what this is in US dollars, that's on your screen right now. I was just thinking, like, is anyone really loving me sitting here like rattling off a series of numbers? Like, I don't love it when I'm editing, so you probably don't love listening to it, and this way it's just there. I think we've officially reached the point where I have to confront the fact that having a knitting YouTube channel is affecting the yarn purchases that I'm deciding to make. Because at the start of this year, I made a video going through all of the finances from last year, all of the expenses and income related to the channel, and I was surprised to find, oh, you know what? I actually spent like the exact same amount of yarn this year that I did previously when I didn't have a YouTube channel. So I think that I've kind of managed to keep my yarn spending consistent separate from the channel. And I think that's not true anymore. I think that in the last few months, I think there's kind of been a shift in my yarn spending, which you may be clocking if you've been following my projects the last few months and hearing me talk about these yarn prices and going, oh God, I wouldn't spend that on a sweater. And so I think I feel inclined to acknowledge, like, I don't think that past me would have either. And I think that this is reflective of my videos about knitting are bringing in enough money that it's making it a lot easier for me to justify spending more money on yarn, if that makes sense. Because like if you're sitting there thinking $395 on a cardigan is unhinged, I cannot in good faith argue with you on that. So last time I talked about this project, I mentioned that I cast it on May 23rd. And at the point of that video, I had completed the 2 saddles for the shoulders and I had started working on the back portion that like joins those 2 saddles together. So I am now much further along than that. So let me show you. You know, I think the cardigans tend to really look like nothing when you hold them up. But so this is the back of the cardigan. This is the front. And we have 2 very nearly complete sleeves. Like I am kind of in the middle of the cuff on them. I am a little bit annoyed, frankly, that I didn't end up having quite enough time to finish the cuff in time for recording, because that just would have been a nice little milestone. But my time last night said no. So in my last video, I had raised a question, which was, am I gonna do buttons on this cardigan? And I mentioned that it was twofold. It was kind of like, well, I feel like I tend to just wear cardigans open anyway. I actually don't think I own any cardigans with buttons on them. But I also admitted that the other factor here was just like fear of not managing to do it in a way that I would be happy with, because it really bugs me when you see button bands kind of like being pulled by the buttons and the band is kind of doing this instead of falling straight. So I had asked, like, does anybody know, like, what is the deal with that? Why does that happen sometimes and not other times? Are there things that I can do to make sure that mine ends up looking like this rather than like this? Because this looks perfect and beautiful and I would love to have this. And I'm pleased to report that I got some really good intel on this. So if this is something that you have also been wondering about or having issues with, I'm hoping that these findings that I'm going to share can also be helpful for you and we can all just have perfect, beautiful cardigan button bands. So one thing that a few people mentioned was just in general, double knit button bands are going to be less susceptible to this as an issue, which is a modification that I'm planning to do on this pattern. It's designed to have a ribbed button band, but I just don't want that. So I'm going to do mine as a double knit button band, and apparently they are just a little bit less likely to do this. So that's great, good head start, promising. But the piece of information that was given the most times and that makes so much sense but would not in any world have occurred to me is the issue of a button needing to have a shaft. So you know how there are some buttons where it's just like a flat circle and then there are holes in it that you like stitch the thread through? And then there are other types of buttons that don't have those holes on top, but instead they have kind of like a loop at the back that's where the thread goes through. Think like the metal buttons on a Chanel jacket kind of thing. So if you think about it, when you sew that second kind of button onto something, that shaft that the thread is going through is keeping the button away from the surface of the fabric. There's like a little bit of a gap there, which if you're sewing with one of those flat buttons that just have the holes, if you don't know any better, you would just sew your thread in those holes, sew it to the fabric, and call it a day. And this is when you get this weird rippling, allegedly. I've yet to test this, but the idea makes perfect sense to me. The concept is that when you have a button band that's doing this, it's because the button is sewn right against the fabric, which means that there actually isn't anywhere for the fabric of the button band to go, because it's just kind of being squished out of the way of the button. But this doesn't mean that you can't use that kind of button on a sweater. It just means that you need to basically create a shaft for that button where there is none using your thread. So basically when you're stitching it on, you're using something as a spacer between your button and the fabric. A knitting needle is the most obvious choice to me in this context. And then once it's secured on, you're just wrapping your thread in that space between where the button is and where the fabric is. You're just wrapping that thread around and around and around to basically create a shaft for the button so that it sits up off of the fabric and create space for the other part of the button band to slot into, and therefore not have to kind of pull to get away to find space for itself to exist in. Doesn't this make perfect sense? And also is a thing that would never, ever, ever in a million years have occurred to me. Like, I think I just would have thought, like, best to sew on that button tight as possible. No. So this is also something that would never have occurred to you, and you've wondered about this problem, now you know. I hope we both learned something today. And shock of all shock, why do I ever ask anything without just searching for a Roxanne Richardson video? Because this is another case where I ask about something And the answer is always that Roxanne Richardson has the most perfect tutorial about it. So she, of course, has a video where she very helpfully demonstrates what causes this problem and how to resolve it. So I will link that in the description below. Another button band tip that I plan to implement, because I went back and watched AK Nora Knit's video where she was finishing her second corsabin cardigan, where I remember that she went into great detail about her pet peeve of this issue in cardigans as well, and I couldn't remember what she had said or what she did to fix it, so I went back to watch it. And another thing that she raises there is that if you really want to make sure that your two pieces of the button band are sitting perfectly on top of each other, like the top one is entirely covering the bottom one, that it's actually helpful to place your button slightly closer to the body of your sweater than to the edge of the button band, because that just encourages it to just pull itself a little bit closer and just make sure that you're getting that full overlap of the top over the bottom. So I will also leave a link to Nora's video in the description. The last sort of consensus tip that I got that I'm hoping I won't need, but I do think it's good to know, is that Roxanne Richardson, of course, has also done a tutorial showing how to put a ribbon reinforcement to the inside of your button band to help prevent that kind of pulling, which is a feature that you will see sometimes in store-bought sweaters and had never occurred to me in the context of knitting, but that this can help resolve issues like that as well as making sure that you don't get some sort of like vertical like stretch dangling, like making sure that your button band stays at the height that the rest of it is and those bottom corners don't droop. But lest you think that's all of the button band research that I have for you, no, that's just the end of the research that I have as far as making sure it doesn't do this thing. But I also started doing research into buttonhole, because this also came up when people were giving me tips on the button band. So I was looking into the best method for creating a buttonhole, because I've never made buttonholes for anything, but I've heard talk of like, sometimes it means breaking your yarn a lot, sometimes it makes holes that go this way or that way, and I was like, I don't know, I just want them to not be ugly, especially like when it's not done up. I would like the holes to be not super obvious, or at least look tidy and not like an accidental hole. Like I've seen buttonholes that are made with yarn overs. I think that that's a common and popular way of making buttonholes that doesn't require breaking the yarn, but I just don't love how those look. Like I think that yarn overs and lace work can look great as part of the design and it's repeating and it's a whole thing, but when it's just a yarn over like in isolation as a buttonhole, it just like looks like a mistake to me. And of course in the context of a button band, like of course it's not, because there's evenly spaced perfect repetition of these like mistakes, so of course it's intentional, but it just doesn't quite have the polish that I feel like I want it to. Someone did point me toward a tutorial that is exactly what I want. So it turns out that is the Champagne Cardigan double knit button band from Petite Knit, and the video tutorial that explains how to do that, which I will also link in the description below. But in that case, you basically just divide the two halves of the stitches of your button band for a few rows and just knit them separately from each other. So you're just not joining those middle stitches, and as a result, you just end up with this little vertical slit that just looks so polished and perfect and is basically invisible when it's not in use, which is just exactly what I would like mine to look like. So this is, I think, what I'm gonna try to go for when it's time for me to do my button band on this cardigan. So that is now the end of our button band research segment of the video, which there was a lot of stuff. I hope that some of that was useful to you. It was definitely useful to me. So if you contributed any of this wisdom, thank you so much, because I feel a lot more like prepared to tackle this now, and like this is a thing that I feel confident that I can achieve the result that I want to, where before I just felt very at sea with it. I felt like it was just going to be like a total crapshoot whether it turned out well or not, and that if it didn't turn out well, I would kind of regret putting those holes there and spending the time sewing on these buttons and all of that. So thank you so much for your help. All right, I think it's time to try this on. All right, so I am a little bit handcuffed here by my needles because these sleeves are both on one set of needles, and also the fact that my yarn is still attached sitting over there on my bench. But this is, you can ish see what's going on. So we have most of our sleeves. The sweater has quite a long cuff, so this is maybe half of my cuffs. So this will continue down to about here. So it should be really nice, like cozy length. I am a little bit unsure about my cuff currently. Let me get closer to show you for a second. I went down to the 5mm needle from the 5.5 for the body, and so the 5mm is what's recommended for the cuff, but I'm just feeling like it's looking a little bit rough and scraggly, and like I'm a little bit concerned that it's not going to cinch enough, and that I might have problems with like my long cozy sleeve actually getting in the way and not being able to push up effectively and stay there. But of course, I mentioned this to my friend Lauren, and she's like, you know though that you should block it before you decide that, right? Because that fabric changes so much. And I'm like, I hate this answer because you're right. but I don't want to do that. So I think I'm just going to finish knitting the cuff to the length it's supposed to be, and then begrudgingly take Lauren's advice and block the rest of the sleeve, because so these were blocked up to, I think here, I think this is where it is. The fabric kind of changes around here. So I think that this up is blocked, this down is not blocked. So yeah, I think I need to finish the cuff, do another block before I decide that I'm either ripping it back and re-knitting it on slightly smaller needles, or deciding that I do like it and just doing my bind off. But so I'm a little bit unsure about that, though honestly, just standing here wearing it, I feel like it looks better than it felt when I was just like staring at it while I was knitting it, which like isn't that always the case. I don't know, like looking at the pattern photos, hers like really doesn't have any sort of dramatic cinching at the cuff either. And so I don't think that I want mine to come in a lot, or it will just have like a very different sort of tone to it. So this is weird. I don't normally stand like this, but I don't normally have my hands forced to be this close together. So I haven't really decided yet what I'm gonna do about the sleeves. TBD on that, but otherwise, like I feel like lengthwise, that's feeling good. I think that's gonna hit at a good spot. I feel like the V-neck, so where do the decreases? Conveniently, the pattern tells you to put in 2 little markers that I just forgot to look for. So the first button will be like here, which I do feel like I like where that button is gonna be, especially remembering there's gonna be a button band. So this is gonna come in a good like inch or more, whatever it is anyway. So I feel like that's a good spot. And then you can see I also got a little bit of my body knit before I switched gears to start the sleeve. So I have several inches there, but still nowhere near like the full body. So I'll come back to that once I'm done the sleeves. Oh, this is also, should adjust this so the saddles are actually centered on my shoulders. So that's one of the things where I'm like, when this is done, is it gonna naturally sit more in the right place when the body is done to where it's supposed to be, and like the neck and like the button band is on? Because it has an inclination to sit forward, so the back rides up and the saddle is sitting like here instead of on my shoulder centered. So we will see how that works out over time, but to give you a bit of a closer look, this is the saddle part of the shoulder, and then you can see where the stitches switch direction, and that's the back. So we definitely need quite a bit more length back there, but we're getting there. Even just as I sit down, you can see the sort of inclination that this has to want to fall off of my shoulders. Now, again, this is going to come in a decent amount. The button band is going to sit further up on my shoulder than this currently is, but will it be by enough? Again, once it's buttoned, I think it's going to be a non-issue, but is it going to require buttoning? TBD. Also, this should come as a surprise to no one if you've been here before. I did knit my sleeves longer than written in the pattern, as I usually do, I think by like 2 or 3 inches, because I am tall and I like a cozy sleeve. So this is our life. So I mentioned knitting these 2 at a time. This is why I'm currently restrained. And I've had some people ask for like tips on how to knit sleeves 2 at a time, because for me, this has been such a game changer. So truthfully at this point, I have no idea what tutorial it was that I watched to do it. So just go see if Roxanne Richardson has one, because if she does, it's probably good, because they always are. But I guess just in terms of like just little tips that I could give you, like it basically is, it's not really any different than working on magic loop, especially as far as your tension goes. Like all the same things you do on magic loop to prevent ladders, you're just doing the exact same thing. And the only thing that's different when you're knitting 2 at a time. So like if this weren't on me, actually, give me a sec. Okay, there we go. So the way that this gets set up on your needles when you're knitting 2 at a time, it's exactly like the way that you do for magic loop, except that they're both on there at the same time, one after the other, but you're doing all the same thing. So like when you go to knit the side facing you, you pull this needle all the way out the way you would in magic loop, you get the 2 like fronts of both your sleeves lined up on your needles ready to go. And so the only thing that's unfamiliar from magic loop is when you finish one and then you have this little gap before you get to the other. And so you're just setting down your working yarn for this one and picking up the working yarn for this one. And because you do have this little gap that's created just in the space between your 2 cords here, you do have to be mindful of your tension a little here, but in the exact same way that you do in magic loop when you start with the next needle, and you just have to make sure that those first couple of stitches are tensioned correctly to prevent ladders. It's the exact same method. So if you're used to that, it's not hard. And then the other thing that I do to make it a little bit easier to manage 2 at a time is that once my sleeves are long enough, I stick my balls of yarn inside them and I set it up as a center pull ball so that my working yarn stays contained within each sleeve, so they're not like bouncing around each other getting tangled. Or at least that's what I usually do. I've talked a lot about this before, where I feel like every pattern and yarn combo seems to raise different problems. Like this is what I find usually works, but sometimes just like your sleeve is too wide and the ball of yarn you're working from is too small, and so it won't stay in the sleeve and it's always falling out the bottom, and so this ends up causing more trouble than if you just have two balls of yarn on the outside that you just have to keep from twisting. So like it kind of depends, but most of the time this is usually what I will try to do, and then if this causes me problems I will explore other options, but to me this is usually the best bet. And then I guess the one other tip that I would give about working 2 at a time is that I think some tutorials for 2 at a time, the way that it will have you initially set yours up is in such a way where your beginning of round is here. And so what it actually means is you knit the front of sleeve 1, the front of sleeve 2, the back of sleeve 2, and then the back of sleeve 1. And I just don't love this for a few different reasons. So one being, if my beginning of round marker lives here, it's gonna fall off at some point. Like I am gonna not notice that I got to the beginning of round and it slipped off and I kept going, and now I'm like, which one was my beginning of round again? Was it over here? Is it this side or is it the other side? And if your beginning of round marker is trapped in the middle between your two sleeves like this, it's much less likely to go anywhere. If you're anything like me, someone who is very unlikely to stop knitting in the middle of going across here, but it's much more likely to put it down once I've gotten to the end where that beginning of round stitch marker would be if it were set up that way. So this just helps prevent that issue. And the other thing that I like about setting it up the way that I do is that it means that the underarms of the sweater are both here in the center, and the tops of the shoulder of the sleeves are both on the outer edges, which means that if I do have any sort of slight discrepancy in the tension of my stitches, either on the outsides, like the typical traditional magic loop tension areas, that it will be the same on both sleeves. And I've also found, just in doing this a few times, that if I'm going to have any sort of tension issues, it's more likely to be on the inside edge than the outside edge. So I just prefer to make sure that that inside edge is the underarm. So it's not really gonna be seen. But again, I don't really tend to have an issue with this. I had an issue with this much more when I was doing my tucker fade. I was talking then about how I was having issues maintaining the right tension at that part while switching colors and micro striping. So that I do find a little bit trickier 2 at a time. So in order to set it up this way where your beginning of round is here, I find it easiest to just set up your 2 separate sleeves on 2 separate pairs of needles and then just move one over to the other. And I'm too bad at spatial reasoning to explain to you exactly how to do that so that you get this, but I believe in you that if you just sit there and you just look at what you have and you think about it and you go, I want to knit one half of sleeve 1 and the other half of sleeve 1, and then one half of sleeve 2 and the other half of sleeve 2, you'll be able to figure out how to put them on. If I could figure this out with my absolutely deplorable spatial reasoning, I promise you that you can also figure this out. And I find that setting it up this way is also helpful when you're working sleeves with decreases. I just find it a lot easier to keep track of what I'm supposed to be doing when I'm knitting all of sleeve 1 and then all of sleeve 2, rather than when your beginning around is here and you knit half of sleeve 1, all of sleeve 2, and then the other half of sleeve 1. I just find it very easy to like forget to do that last decrease or whatever it is on the back of sleeve 1 when you finally get back around to it. I just find it much simpler to keep track of things when the beginning around is in between your 2 sleeves like this. So other things about this cardigan. I had a few different people mention last time just like cautioning me about Noro Madara in general. A lot of like, prepare yourself. It's very pretty to look at, but it's not very realistic to work with or to wear. And so some of this I can't really speak to yet because it's not yet an item in my wardrobe suffering wear, pilling, or whatever it's gonna do. So I don't know about that yet, but I do know how it's been to work with up to this point. So some people had mentioned having a really terrible time with it as far as even just trying to get it wound up, like it just constantly tearing and coming apart. So this is my sort of coming apart yarn ball because I've been pulling from the center of this, but because if you're not familiar with Noro Madara, it is a very sort of scraggly, like it's like bougie luxury disaster yarn, right? It's like very loosely plied in places. It's thicker in some places and thinner in some places. I love it because I feel like I said this in my last video, looks like it was created by like little magical collector elves. And that is very much where its charm lies, right? But I guess there are certain impracticalities that come along with that. So for what it's worth, I did not have a problem winding this up. I did find that, you know, when you're winding yarn, sometimes you'll like hit a snag. So once or twice I did hit a snag and I was winding too fast. And so when it hit the snag, the yarn did break, but I kind of feel like that's on me. I was winding my yarn too fast. You know, I was getting impatient. I was cranking really fast. This feels like my own doing, and that has happened to me with other yarns as well. Like I've had the same issue with winding mohairs before. Like I didn't find that this broke any easier than silk mohair. And as soon as I reminded myself to like chill out and just wind it at a reasonable pace, I didn't have any issues with that. And people also mentioned issues with it, like not even being able to knit with it without it breaking. I haven't experienced anything like that with mine, so I'm not sure if maybe some batches are different than others in that way, but I have absolutely not had an issue anywhere approaching that with mine. People have also mentioned that because it's so kind of loosely plied in places, that it can just start to look very worn very quickly with use, and that depilling it doesn't really like work in the way that it would on most yarns, that it's just not going to hold up that well. And I guess we're just gonna have to see how that goes, because that ship is kind of already sailed. It's in Fiji by now, along with the whole cast of Love Island USA. And I actually now wonder whether this is why Noro Madara is so often held with a mohair when it's used in patterns, because this is a thing that I mentioned the last time, where both this pattern and so many other cases when I looked at projects on Ravelry that use Noro Madara, so often they're paired with a mohair. And I was kind of always like, but why? Like, it's so pretty. Why would I want a mohair that kind of obscures it and kind of muffles it? And at the time I kind of speculated like, well, maybe it's just intended to sort of fill in the fabric because of the thicks and thins and the way that that can sort of create a bit of an uneven fabric depending on the gauge that you're knitting at. But that I was finding that the gauge of mine was quite nice, that I quite liked how it looked and didn't feel like I needed that mohair. But I'm now kind of wondering if a lot of the time the purpose of that mohair is actually more just for like a structural integrity that's afforded to you by the silk core of the mohair. That would kind of make sense to me. So this is a project that I think the jury is just kind of gonna be out on until I've been able to wear it quite a bit in the aftermath of finishing it. So that's a thing where I'm gonna have to keep checking in on. As of right now, I have no complaints about this yarn, but in terms of longevity, I can't really speak to that right now. What I can speak to though is so many ends of this yarn to weave in, because so this pattern, I think this pattern is beautiful. Like I love what the end result is. The pattern is written very clearly. I found it very easy to follow. All is well in that department. It just is a very fiddly construction. So I have never knit a saddle shoulder construction before, so I don't honestly know if this is just the nature of a saddle shoulder construction by default, or if some of this is actually just specific to this exact pattern and this exact version of the construction. But I just don't think I've ever had to break the yarn so many times in the early part of the project, and also just experienced an early part of the project, which I'll define in a moment, that went on for so long, which to me is just the part of the pattern where you're having to follow instructions really closely pretty frequently before you get to a part where it's like, and then just keep doing this for a while. You know, the parts where I'm like, I feel like I can't just put on a show while I do this, unless it's a show I'm prepared to miss half of, because I'm gonna be too engaged in following the instructions. And I just feel like usually that part of the process on most knits for me is like a couple of hours to a couple of days worth of knitting max. And I feel like in this one, it just was days and days and days. And then that also dragged out into, I think it really took me like 2 weeks to get out of that phase, in part because that phase just demands a lot more like mental attention. And so when it happened to coincide with a week or two where I was busier with work than usual and didn't have as much time to knit, like on a day when I had only 45 minutes to knit, I didn't really feel like it. I didn't want to spend it doing fiddly setup things. Like I would have loved to spend that time just mindlessly working away on an established knit, but I didn't want to do that, which meant that I just really didn't knit very much for a week or two, because I just didn't feel like doing that most days, because I just didn't really feel like I had the time or the space or the capacity. This is also how I know that I'm a fairly monogamous knitter through and through, because as much as I say that in theory I would have loved to just have something that I could mindlessly work away on, I did technically have that in the way of my essential blanket from Unraveled that's on my needles, but I've just been finding that like, just whatever is not my main whip, I just like am not interested. Like it feels like it doesn't count, and like count toward what? I don't know. It just feels like it's not for any purpose if it's not the main thing that I've decided that I want to be knitting. It's like whatever I've decided is my current whip is like the thing that I feel motivated to work toward finishing, and anything else just feels irrelevant. So instead of knitting, I just spent that time doing other things for a couple of weeks because it was just too fiddly. I couldn't be bothered. So it kind of waited until days where I had bigger, more expansive amounts of time where I could really dig into it and make a lot of progress and still get a bit of that relaxation time in between, and not just spend 45 minutes trying to figure out what am I doing? Okay, this and then that and then that. Like I just found that this construction wasn't super compatible with the kind of chill low-key knitting that I was really wishing that I had in those couple of weeks. And like I said, so many ends to weave in because I had to braid the yarn so many times. So I have since gone in and woven all those ends in because I knew that if I got to the end of this project and still had all of those ends, it would feel gross to have to weave them all in. But also I was just finding that because it's a cardigan, so your ends aren't like kind of trapped on the inside like they would be in a pullover. I just felt like they were in the way constantly. They were just irritating me, hanging here, there, and everywhere, flopping out, getting in the way. Is this my working yarn? Oh no, it's just a tail coming from somewhere. So I did pause to weave all of those in to get them out of my way, and I'm very glad that I did because they were very annoying. And future me will be very happy to not have to do that. Speaking of fiddly construction bits, I don't think I've ever done German short rows so many separate times in a pattern for separate things. Like I've just never seen so many different parts of a sweater be shaped using German short rows. And at first I was like, again? Are you kidding me? This is terrible. I hate this. But I think that I have finally, and we'll see if this holds, but for now, I feel like I've made friends with German short rows. And I think what happened is that this pattern forced me to do them enough times, close enough together without being within one session, that I could actually remember how to do it. So I didn't have to look it up every time, which is usually my experience with German short rows, is I first have to rewatch a tutorial to relearn how to do it. And turns out they're much less annoying when you just already know how to do them. So while I was very annoying like the second and the third time they showed up, by like the fourth or the fifth time I was like, you know what? I've got this and I actually don't mind. I feel good about this. So you know what, if this pattern's role in my knitting career is to really teach me German short rows in a way that maybe hopefully will actually stay in my long-term memory, I think that's a win. I also want to point out this pattern clarified something for me about German short rows that I've kind of always been a bit fuzzy on and not been quite sure how to read a lot of patterns when they talk about this. And the fact that this pattern clarified this for me is not surprising because the nature of this pattern is to really explain things. So like if you were gonna criticize this pattern writing in any direction, it would be over explaining. If you yourself are super comfortable with all of these things and you're like, oh my God, I do not need all these words, just where is the information that I need? I really like when things are clarified and extra clarified. I don't mind having to read a paragraph instead of a line because it's not like knitting patterns are 500 pages long. So like if it's a few pages longer than it would have been otherwise in the scheme of knitting something and for the sake of understanding something better, mitigating potential confusion, I think that's great. I think that's worthwhile. So in the way that the German short rows are explained in the pattern, she actually specifies, because you know how when you're doing short rows, you'll get some sort of direction of like, turn your work and then knit until X number of stitches past the double stitch. And this is always phrased like slightly differently in different patterns, but I tend to read it and feel a little bit unsure of like, are we counting the double stitch in that number of stitches? And I think that depending on how it's exactly phrased in each pattern, I think I tend to assume that it's not. Like if it's 4 stitches past the double stitch, that would make me think it's 4 stitches after it, you know, and so not including it. But I feel like there tends to be a little bit of fuzziness in wording sometimes where it's not really clear to me and I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure they mean not counting the double stitch, but I'm not entirely positive. Is this gonna end up in the right place? Is it a little bit off? And so I really appreciated that in this pattern, she very clearly specifies, like I don't remember the exact wording, but it's something to the effect of like, this many stitches past the double stitch, not including the double stitch. And it just felt like such a relief to not be wondering that. And again, I don't remember the exact wording, nor do I think I probably should give you exact wording from a pattern, but I just remember thinking like, oh, like based on the way you've explained that, that makes me think that it probably applies this way to virtually all other patterns that just describe it in slightly different terms, but that this is probably the rule that I can apply going forward by default, and it's probably gonna work for me. And I feel like that in and of itself has sort of like improved my relationship with German short rows because I just I like to follow instructions. I'm good at following instructions. I will take the time to read the instructions, reread the instructions, make sure I'm doing it correctly. But because of this, one of my absolute pet peeves is when I'm trying so hard to follow instructions, but feel like I'm not sure whether I've done it right because there's something in the instructions that I don't quite know what they mean or how to interpret. Like, I'm trying so hard and I don't know if I did it wrong. Like, it would be better to me to know, oh, whoops, misunderstood that. Got to go back and redo it. But to instead be in this weird limbo state of like, am I doing it right? Is this the thing? Do I proceed from here? Is it going to come back and bite me later? Like, am I going to realize this didn't go correctly? So I feel like that feeling has come up most of the time when I've done German short rows because of this uncertainty around, do I count the double stitch or do I not count the double stitch? So just to have that clarity in this pattern, and I'm pretty sure going forward, I think this is probably an assumption that you could go forward and apply to other patterns giving this instruction as well. It just makes the idea of German short rows so much more pleasant to me because I can just feel like I know what I'm doing and I'm doing it right and I don't have to think twice about it. Like I said before, I've also ordered some buttons. They're not here yet, so I can't show them to you. So we'll look at those hopefully in the next update. But I ordered a couple of different ones because I wasn't quite sure exactly which ones I would like the best, and I ordered 2 slightly different sizes because I think that the pattern recommends 19mm needles, and basically all the options that I could find that I liked were either 20mm, which is close enough that I would not worry about it at all. I would assume that would work, or 22mm, so a little bit bigger, but I felt like the ones that were 22mm, I thought I would more likely like the color of them on it. So we're gonna have to do a little bit of a test when they get here and see what I think is gonna work the best, but I'm reasonably confident that whatever set I don't end up using for this, I will be able to use for a future cardigan project that I'm earmarking for sort of this fall or winter that I have in mind. But both of them are sort of a version of a sort of tortoise shelly style button, which actually very much like my glasses. It's very much the idea. So once I got to the point where I had finished with my sleeve decreases for this, I decided to do a mid-project block. And prior to the block, I put it on and I was like, you know, I feel like the double knit button band really needs to do a lot of work to polish this up because it's currently kind of looking like something out of Shrek Swamp. and I think that, you know, Noro Madara, best case scenario is it looks like a very luxury version of something out of Shrek Swamp, like that sort of weirdness and quirkiness is what we like about it. But I was feeling like it usually ends up looking like a much more polished version of Shrek Swamp than what I was currently seeing when I was trying it on. It was just feeling very like lumpy bumpy in the sort of like shoulder construction area, and I was just kind of like, okay, those finishing touches are gonna have to do a lot of finishing to really pull this thing together. So I was very relieved to see that I feel like just blocking it took care of a lot of that. The shoulder construction relaxed so much in the blocking process. It now looks much more like, of course it still needs a button band to polish it up, of course it still needs finished sleeves, not to mention the entire rest of its body, but now it looks like I can see how this becomes a nice garment in the end and isn't like a, oh, what a nice little craft project, somebody's first sweater they knit themselves, you know, that was sort of how it was looking before, and so I feel much better to see how it's sort of been polished up through the blocking. One thing I did not really expect from the blocking is that my gauge did change to like a not insignificant degree. So with my swatch, because I did knit and block my swatch, it did not change in blocking by any amount that I could measure. So I was like, okay, I don't really have to worry about this a whole lot. I did want to still block it at that stage in the sleeve process, just because I know that especially lengthwise blocking can sometimes turn out differently in the garment than the swatch because of like the weight of a sleeve pulling itself down. So I wanted to check for that reason. But the gauge actually changed width-wise significantly more in the garment than it did in the swatch. So instead of perfectly matching the gauge of the pattern, which is I think 16 stitches to 4 inches, it's now 14 and a half, which 1.5 doesn't sound like a lot until you calculate the fact that it's actually a 10% difference. Like my cardigan is going to be 10% larger than it was supposed to be, which is not a tiny amount, right? In say a cardigan that's supposed to be 40 inches around the chest, that's now 44 inches. That's a size or 2 up. And I'm not opposed to an oversized cardigan. This is kind of intended to be an oversized cardigan by design anyway, but my concern is whether I'm gonna have issues with like fit on the shoulders. Like, is it just gonna wanna keep slipping off of my shoulders? And this is a thing that I feel like is really hard to gauge without like finishing the project, because just until you have the whole body with the whole weight of it, making it sit where it's gonna sit, and then adding the button band, which is done after, like, how do I really know how this is gonna sit on me? So I'm like, do I just, like, I guess I just proceed and hope for the best. Like, I think it's okay. I think worst case scenario, it will just kind of require itself to be buttoned. And when I watched Hypnit Hooray's project vlog about her doing the test knit for this pattern, I think that is a thing she mentioned. I think she said that hers does need to stay buttoned in order for it to stay on her. So this is a possibility, but I think it's one that I'm good with. Like, now that I have learned how to do this button band the way that I want it to look, like, I think I can admit that I really do want it to have buttons, and I do think I will actually really like wearing it buttoned, and that is in the way that I was talking last time about the struggle of finding a cardigan that doesn't feel like a weird, like, past me cosplay kind of thing. I've never worn cardigans like that before, and so wearing a cardigan that way does feel like a non-past me way for me to wear cardigans, in a way that does interest me, now that it feels like something that I actually trust that I could do, and that it's not going to turn out in a way that's disappointing to me. So I think I feel okay with embracing potentially needing to keep it buttoned, because I'm like, if I think about the idea of restarting this based on how, like, time consuming and fiddly all those early stages were, I'm like, do I want to redo those? I don't at all. I have not been one to, like, avoid redoing things if I'm not happy with them, but I just don't really want to do that part of the pattern again. And I think that if it becomes clear as I continue working on this that it's actually really going to be an issue, and that I, like, really won't be able to wear this in a way that I will like it and like it worth the effort and the money that went into it, then I will have to do that and I will make that decision. But right now I'm feeling like, I feel like there's a good enough chance that it's going to turn out in a way that I'm really happy with, that I'm just going to keep going with it for now, and we'll see what happens. This does, though, also bring us back to the mohair question of it all, and that the original pattern recommends using a mohair with it. So first of all, I think we need another moment for the fact that the gauge is supposed to be 16 stitches. My post-blocking gauge is 14 and a half. On the recommended needles, has this ever happened? Have I ever had gauge that was too loose on the recommended needles? I don't think this has ever happened to me in my whole knitting life. I am always coming up with a gauge that's too small and having to upsize my needles in order to compensate. So to be knitting too loose on recommended needles, earth-shattering. But I do suspect this isn't because I've suddenly become, like, a loose knitter, or even that Ozetta knits even tighter than I do. I think based on the swatching, I suspect we probably knit very similarly. And I think what's probably happening here is that the absence of the mohair is allowing the Noro Madara to grow more in blocking than it would if, again, that silk core that's not nearly as, like, malleable, we're sort of holding it in place. Because I have read that Noro Madara tends to really grow in blocking. So this was the thing that when I was doing my swatch, I was looking for, I was expecting. I was surprised not to really find it. Lo and behold, I just needed a little more fabric. And then I found it, no problem. So hopefully this still turns out to be a size that is reasonable and that I like wearing. Cross your fingers for me. But at this moment, I'm kind of like, oh my God, should I have, like, gone down a needle size? Like, I think that if I were to start this project over, I don't think that I would pick a different size. I think I would just change my needle size. I would actually be going down a needle size, which would be a very weird feeling. Okay, I have been talking for over an hour about this cardigan, and I think that's finally all that I have to say about it. Hopefully I can edit it down to less than that. Thoughts and prayers for editing Allie. All right, so we actually now have some acquisitions to get into today. And the first of them, we all knew this was coming. What have I acquired? My 6mm needle that was missing, which I, maybe 3 weeks ago, finally gave up on locating, ordered a replacement for, knowing full well that that would summon this, right? Because such are the laws of the universe. And wouldn't you know, the other day, sitting there knitting on the couch, I drop a stitch marker down in, like, the gap between the cushion and the arm of the couch. Okay, put my hand down in there, kind of shift the cushion aside, look down, and what do I find nestled beside that stitch marker? I swear I moved couch cushions looking for this. I know I moved things. I know I moved those cushions. Apparently I didn't move them entirely. Like, I must have just kind of, like, pulled an edge up to look, and this must have just happened to not be revealed in the exact way that I did that. I'm just like, are you kidding me? Are you for real? So I now have a spare. I actually now have 2 spare 6mm needles because of course it's very hard to buy one single 6mm needle when one is missing. So I had to buy 2. So I now have 4 6mm needles, which is not even a size that I use super frequently. So cool. That is not the only acquisition today though, because we also have some yarn acquisitions. In my summer knitting plans, I mentioned that one of the things that was high on my list for wanting to create was the Ardent top. And this might look familiar because these are in fact the exact yarns and the exact colors from the pattern because I'm being really boring this time around and I'm really going by the book. Also, I guess my Lakes cardigan is also in the sample yarn. If you're new here, I usually knit things in very different colors than they're shown. Like one of my recent finished objects, my call out pullover, shown like this. I knit this. So please don't hold my total lack of creativity here against me too much, but I just really liked these colors together. I really love the like neon and neutral pairing. I think it's so fun. So let me dig these out. So this is the Kelborn Woolens Mojave. This is 60% cotton, 40% linen. This is 50 grams or 170 meters of sport weight yarn. And I have 3 skeins of each of the 2 separate colors. So 6 skeins total. So I ordered these online from the Tea Cozy in Seattle, which I would have loved to order these from within Canada and not have to subject myself to yet more duties. But I was finding it, again, much like the Noro Madara, really hard to find this yarn in stock in a lot of places. Like with their full color selection, I was finding like 1 or 2 colors in a lot of different places, but never the colors that I wanted together. And I don't think that I could find one of these 2 colors, I don't remember which one it was, in Canada at all. And then I was also finding it tricky trying to find a good yarn substitution that was both sport weight, I feel like that's not the most common yarn weight, a good match for the fiber content, and for, again, the colors, because the colors are so much of what I love about this, like specifically this neutral color that just provides such a fun base to pair something really bright with it. So let's look at the numbers. The yarn itself cost me $92 Canadian. Shipping was $27 Canadian, and then $46 in duty, because this one came, I think, through UPS, who, like, it's not just duty that they're charging you, they're also charging you absurd brokerage fees that cost way more than the duty. So here we are with a total yarn cost of $165 Canadian. So I'm gonna need to get a lot of wear out of this one to get that cost per wear somewhere reasonable, which that is also true of the Lakes cardigan, but I feel like just the nature of a cardigan like that doesn't seem hard to do. Like it's the kind of cardigan that I think I will just throw on a lot anytime I'm cold kind of thing, which makes it much easier to work your cost per wear down to a lower number. Whereas this is like a current version of like a going out top, you know? Like it's a top that I probably wouldn't put on just to like work from home that day, which I will probably wear the cardigan in that context as well as wearing it out places. And this feels more like a top that I put on because I'm like going out to do something, which will make it a little bit trickier to work that cost per wear down. But hopefully I love it enough when it's done that it feels like it was a good decision. Okay, now I actually have one more acquisition to show you that is not needles or yarn, but it is still fiber related. So, are we ready for this? Look at this print. Isn't it beautiful? So this is from Mothfolk Studio, who might sound familiar to you if you watch her knitting podcast or if you watch my knitting podcast where I talk about other smaller knitting podcasts that I recommend you checking out. She just recently released this print and I immediately was like, I need that. I love to collect art prints. I felt like this would be a really good fit in my gallery wall that goes up my staircase. But I just love all of these little details of things that are related to fiber arts. And then I also couldn't resist on her website. She also sells these little patches. So this is another illustration of hers that is, I believe, block printed onto this. And so it's sewn onto this like piece of felt. And I don't know exactly what I'm gonna do with this yet, but I have visions of incorporating it into some kind of knit. Like I'm thinking that maybe it's like a pocket on something or something like that, you know? I'm not sure exactly, but I do know that I immediately loved it and was like, I need to do something with this. So we will do something with this. Stay tuned. So if you also love this print, just shout out for Mothfolk Studio. You can go to her website. I will put her shop URL on screen and go check it out. All right, that's all I've got for you in the knitting friend today. And because it's a standard format episode where I haven't already spent a bunch of other time talking about other things, we actually have time for a proper off the needle segment today, which I feel like it's been a while. So let's start out with a small business shout out. Hey, Buggy. Do you want to come be involved? Over here. Hi, Copper. Hi. Hi, you want to participate? You want to be in the small business shout out? Do you have a small business? Tell us about it. Okay, so the small business I want to tell you about today is a little Canadian business called Cedar and Vine, and they're where these pants are from. They make beautiful linen clothing that's all made to order, and they also do it made to measure for like a small customization fee. So I had mine customized because I pants are always too short on me. So I had them add a couple inches to the inseam, and I also had them add a few inches to the rise, because I find that when pants are a style that like wants to sit at my natural waist like these do, it just tends to be uncomfortable. Like it will be fine when I'm standing up, but when I'm sitting, it's just straining and it's digging into me and it's uncomfortable. And I've just learned that, oh, if you can just get a couple of extra inches added to the rise of your pants, they will be much more comfortable. And that is the beauty of a small business that makes things made to order and made to measure. So highly, highly recommend them for that purpose. Also, cannot say enough good things about their customer service, because I will be honest with you, I completely botched my first order. I gave measurements that I did not realize were very outdated and not accurate anymore. So I received my pair of pants and they did not fit the way that I expected them to. And I was like, oh no, like this is custom. Will they even take these back? Like I gave them these measurements and they made them to these measurements and they don't fit me, but they were amazing. They let me return them, no questions asked. They made me a new pair and they're perfect. They're so, so comfortable, which this was my goal in ordering them. I was like, I would like to get a couple of pairs of pants that I feel like I can wear out in the world and feel like I'm wearing like real nice pants, but that I don't feel like I want to change out of when I get home, you know, or that I'd actually put on just to work from home for the day because they're comfy enough. And these 100% fit that bill. I feel like they have a really fun kind of unexpected shape with the way that like the leg tapers in this sort of like structured 3D way. I'm just a really big fan of Cedar and Vine. They don't have like a traditional affiliate program as far as I could find, but they do have the regular just like refer a friend. So if you use my link in the description, you can get $15 off of your order and you can be supporting a small Canadian woman-owned business that's focusing on sustainability and fashion. And I think that's awesome. All right, now let's do a book update. Okay, so my favorite book that I've read since we last talked is Clever Girl by Hannah McGregor. Actually, this is making me realize that this Laura Dern outfit is more relevant than I initially conceived of, because this book, as you may have guessed, if you are also a Jurassic Park fan, the line Clever Girl, this is what the hunter says to the velociraptor right before she eats him. This book is in fact about Jurassic Park. It's basically a critical analysis of the movie through like a queer feminist lens, written by someone who really loves Jurassic Park. I love nothing more than like a nerdy critical analysis of something like pop culture and zeitgeisty, especially if it's one that I love. I already love Hannah McGregor from the podcast Material Girls. Highly recommend you check it out if you also love nerdy critical analysis of pop culture kind of stuff. But this book was everything I imagined it would be and more, and I actually listened to it as an audiobook through Everand, but I'm like it's upsetting to me that it's not on my bookshelf because I loved it so much, so I think I probably also need to buy myself a copy. Which reminds me, links to all the books that I talk about are always in the description below, both in physical book form and audiobook. And then the other things I've been reading have been summary romances, and specifically ones where I've gotten to go see both of the authors talk. So this one, Carley Fortune, recently did a book talk in Toronto for her new book, One Golden Summer, and if you followed my book segments, you know that I love a Carley Fortune book, so I was really excited about this. And it's also just fun to get a signed copy, which also I think means that now 2 of my 3 Carley Fortune books are signed, because the first one that I bought, like I was first prompted to pick up a Carley Fortune book because in my local bookstore they had like an author signed copy of one of her books, and unfortunately this book event wasn't like a signing, so it wasn't one where I could like bring my other book and get her to sign it. But she is such a good speaker. Like it was one of those book events where they're like in conversation with a moderator asking them questions, but it also happened that this moderator was like a good friend of hers, so they really had a good rapport. But also Carley is just, I mean, I was gonna say such a good storyteller, like in the way that she like talks to the audience, but like, duh, she's an author. But I was really taken with how much like stage presence and charisma she has. Like I think that a lot of writers are much more introverted, and you can often tell when you do book talks that they're kind of out of their element. Carley was thriving. Carley was so at home. She was so fun. Her outfit was incredible. It was like trimmed with a feather boa on her pants. It was incredible. As for the book itself, I quite enjoyed this. It's not my favorite Carley Fortune book, but my least favorite Carley Fortune book is a super fun read of a book. So this is set at the lake in cottage country in Ontario, as so many of her books are, and it just, no one evokes that kind of place the way that Carley Fortune does. The setting is such a character in her books, and just like, as someone who grew up going to a place like that, her writing is just instantly teleporting. Her characters are always so lovable despite their issues, and I just always love a Carley Fortune book. And then the other one is The High Dive by Chelsea Fagan. And this author event, it was so surreal to see Chelsea, because I actually know of Chelsea primarily from The Financial Diet, which is a YouTube channel she's had for like over a decade at this point about personal finance targeted at millennial women. So I've sort of like grown up in my young adulthood alongside Chelsea, because I've been watching that channel from the very beginning. I have seen like hours upon hours upon hours upon hours of her at this point. So it was one of those cases where it's like, oh my God, to see this person in 3 dimensions is like kind of weird. So that was very cool. And I also got her to sign my book. This is when we actually did get to like go up and have the author sign your book. So she did personalize it to me along with a couple of her other books that I have as well. And I did get to feel special for a minute because I had brought with me one of her books that she wrote as part of like the financial diet years ago. So like there were several people in line who had a copy of her first romance novel because this is her second one. So I brought that with me for signing too. So did many other people. But I think I was the first person in line that she saw who had a copy of her financial diet book. So when I put the books down on the table, she just like looked at it and like immediately laughed. It was like, oh my God, this is hilarious. And like pulls out her own phone to take a picture of all the books together for herself. So, and I'm still partly through reading this book. Where's my, oh, it sort of slipped in. I'm this far through reading this book. I'm getting close to the end now. One of the things that I really like about this book is, unsurprisingly, given Chelsea's background in finance, and the financial diet is kind of a special case where like so much personal finance content is just about like personal responsibility and like you must deprive yourself so you can save as much as possible. So if you're not doing this or you can't do that, you're a failure, you're doing things wrong. And the financial diet was the first financial content that I ever found that acknowledged the role that systems play in all of this. And some of us are much more set up to succeed from the very beginning based on our life circumstances, where others have the entire deck stacked against them. And you just can't apply the same rules in the same way when you're operating at that kind of deficit in a system that was not designed for you. And that's something that Chelsea absolutely brings into her writing. The story tackles issues of class and privilege in a way that doesn't get in the way of it being like a fun romance, but it's also just grounded in reality in a way that I feel like so many, especially romance books that just want to be more escapist, just aren't doing. And I really love the way that she does it. All right, I think that's all that I've got for you today. So let me know how your knitting is going. What are you working on this summer? Also, what are you reading this summer? Curious to know. And if you'd like to be here next time, please consider subscribing. If you haven't, if you already have though, you're my favorite, and I'll see you next time.